afternoon, moms and pops were gone. Talk about his first time.
Immature wasn't just another 90s R&B boy band. They were handpicked, molded, and controlled from the very beginning. But behind the scenes, something much darker was happening. Because the man who discovered them, Stokes, is the same man who would later be accused of some of the most disturbing allegations in the industry. And if you think those accusations only involved B2K, think again. Marcus Houston, Romeo, and LDB became household names. But what most people don't realize is that their success was built on a foundation of secrets. There's a reason one member vanished without a trace, another ended up permanently disfigured, and their so-called mentor, well, he's been trying to erase his past ever since. And if you thought the story ended with their music, think again, because the most shocking part came long after they left the stage. Before we get into that, let's rewind to where it all started, and the mastermind behind it all. In the early 1990s, three young kids from Los Angeles, Marcus Batman Houston, Jerome Romeo Jones, and Don Half-Pint Santos, were brought together to form what seemed like the next great R&B boy band. But they didn't find success on their own. They were chosen. The man behind it all? Stokes. At the time, Stokes was just an ambitious young producer with a vision. He wanted to create a group that could rival Boys the Two, Men, and New Edition, except younger, more marketable, and completely under his control. That's exactly what he got. Immature debuted in 1992, before any of them were even teenagers, and the industry packaged them as exactly what their name suggested: young, fun, and innocent. They weren't singing about sex and partying like Jodeci or Drew Hill. Instead, their songs were about puppy love, crushes, and heartbreak. Their image was clean, their style was trendy, and their music was carefully crafted to make them seem like harmless teen heartthrobs. And for a while, it worked. But what fans didn't realize was that Immature wasn't just a boy band, they were a business. A business controlled by one man who decided everything about them. And when you look deeper into how this group was managed, you start to realize this wasn't just about music. This was about control. And it wouldn't take long for that control to turn into something much darker. From the outside, Immature looked like they were living the dream. Three young boys, hit records, music videos, screaming fans. It was every kid's fantasy. But behind the scenes, they weren't in control of anything. Stokes wasn't just their manager. He controlled every aspect of their lives. He dictated their image, their sound, their friendships, even their personal lives. He was the one deciding where they lived, where they performed, and who they could talk to. And most importantly, he controlled their money. To the public, they looked like stars, but behind closed doors, they were kids working nonstop with no real power over their own careers. And here's where things get really suspicious. Whenever a member tried to leave, they just disappeared. Don Half-Pint Santos, he left the group early on, And after that, he practically vanished. No music, no interviews, he was just gone. Romeo started wearing an eye patch out of nowhere, and no one got a straight answer why until years later. And even though Immature was making money, their contracts were structured in a way that kept them dependent on Stokes. And if this sounds familiar, that's because Chris Stokes did the exact same thing to B2K. He took young talented boys, promised them fame, and then kept them under his thumb. But that's not even the worst part, because what happened behind closed doors was even more disturbing. For years, Immature's success seemed like a typical 90s boy band story, until one former artist shattered the illusion. In 2007, Demario "Raz-B" Thornton, a former member of B2K, dropped a bombshell on YouTube. In a series of disturbing videos, he accused Chris Stokes and Marcus Houston of sexual abuse. The claims were graphic. Raz-B alleged that when he was younger, he and his older brother were both abused by Stokes, who was not only their manager, but also their own cousin. And then he dropped another name, Marcus Houston. He claimed that Houston was involved in the abuse as well. He said that Stokes forced young boys to submit in order to stay in the industry. He described a toxic environment where kids were being manipulated and silenced, and for a moment, it looked like everything was about to come crashing down. But then, something strange happened. Raz-B suddenly retracted his statements. Days after the videos went viral, Raz-B released another video, claiming he was dropping all allegations. But people weren't buying it. Why would someone go public with such serious claims only to take them back days later? Was he pressured, threatened, paid off? Because over the next few years, Raz-B would continue speaking out, only to backtrack again and again. And every time he did, Chris Stokes and Marcus Houston remained silent. They never addressed the accusations in detail. They never took legal action against Raz-B for defamation. They just ignored it. And that silence? It only made people more suspicious. And the way Marcus Houston handled the situation only made things even weirder. When most celebrities are falsely accused of something serious, they fight back. They threaten lawsuits, demand apologies, and do everything they can to clear their names. But when Raz-B accused Marcus Houston of abuse, Houston barely reacted. Instead of addressing the claims, he took out a restraining order. Think about that. If someone made false allegations against you, wouldn't you want to shut it down immediately? Wouldn't you demand justice? Houston didn't. Instead, he claimed Raz-B was harassing him and filed legal documents to keep his distance. It wasn't a public denial. It wasn't a lawsuit for defamation. It was just a way to avoid the conversation. But here's where things get even more suspicious. Raz-B kept flip-flopping on his accusations, but he never completely took them back. He would speak out in interviews, then go silent. He would post videos exposing Stokes and Houston, then delete them. And every time he did, his behavior seemed more erratic, like he was under pressure. And yet neither Stokes nor Houston ever addressed the accusations head on. The industry stayed quiet. The media barely covered it, and just like that, the conversation faded. But Houston's silence about Raz-B's allegations wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Because years later, he would find himself at the center of another controversy, one that had people questioning everything about him. And that brings us to his marriage, the relationship that shocked fans and had people wondering if there was a disturbing pattern to his behavior. If you thought Marcus Houston had managed to put his past behind him, think again, because in 2020, his name was back in the headlines, and for all the wrong reasons. This time, it wasn't about Immature. It wasn't about Raz-B. It was about his 19-year-old fiancée, Mia Dickey. And the internet was not having it. Houston was 38 years old at the time of their engagement, a full-grown man, nearly twice her age. And here's where things get disturbing. Nobody knew where Mia came from. She had no real online history before meeting Houston. And according to some sources, she had actually been missing before she suddenly reappeared as his fiancée. Then came the biggest red flag. Houston admitted that they met in 2018, when Maya was only 17. Let's start with Jerome Romeo Jones. For years, fans speculated about why he always wore an eye patch. Some thought it was a medical condition. Others assumed it was just part of his image. But in 2019, Romeo finally told the truth. It turns out Brandy was the one who blinded him. Yes, that Brandy. According to Romeo, Brandy was arguing with Half Pint one day when she threw a book behind her, without looking. That book hit Romeo directly in the eye. The impact detached his retina. His lens fell out, and just like that, he was permanently blind in one eye. But here's the weird part. Even after this incident, he never spoke about it for years. Why? Was he told to stay silent? And speaking of staying silent, where is Half Pint? Out of all the members, his disappearance is the strangest. After leaving Immature, he vanished from the music industry completely. No solo career, no interviews, no public presence at all. The only thing people know about him today? He got married, but even that was years ago. It's like he didn't just leave the group. He erased himself from the industry. And then there's Kelton LDB Kessie. Unlike the others, LDB is still around, but he's not making music anymore. He's deep into the cannabis business now. He rarely mentions Immature, and if you check his Instagram, you'd have to scroll all the way back to 2019 to find anything music related. It's almost as if after Immature ended, none of them wanted anything to do with the industry. And honestly, can you blame them? They grew up under Chris Stokes' control. They saw what happened to B2K. So maybe the real question isn't why they left. It's why Marcus Houston is the only one still defending the industry that made them famous. And that's where things start to get even more suspicious. The music industry has a dark history of taking young artists, exploiting them for their talent, and then discarding them once they're no longer profitable. And looking at Immature's story, you have to wonder, were they just another industry sacrifice? Think about it. They were handpicked by Chris Stokes, who had full control over their image, their money, and their careers. When one member left, he vanished completely. Another ended up physically scarred from an accident that no one talked about for years. And the only one who truly thrived after the group ended? Marcus Houston, the one closest to Stokes. And it's a pattern that literally repeated itself. Look at B2K. They were another Chris Stokes project, another young, successful group that ended in mysterious fallouts, abuse allegations, and industry silence. But we've seen this before too. Look at TLC, NSYNC, and even the Jackson 5. These groups were built to generate money first, protect the artist second. They were controlled, overworked, and in some cases, financially robbed. And when they started speaking up, the industry turned its back on them. So was Immature's downfall a coincidence or part of a bigger industry pattern? And more importantly, why is Marcus Houston still thriving while the rest of his group faded into the background? Because if the allegations against Chris Stokes are true, then Houston wasn't just another artist. He was Stokes' protege. And that raises even more questions. Did Houston's loyalty to Stokes protect him? Was he rewarded for staying silent while others were discarded? And did the industry cover up everything that happened behind closed doors? The truth is, we may never get a real answer. But one thing is clear. Immature's story isn't as innocent as it seemed. They gave us some of the most iconic 90s R&B hits, but the industry's grip on them may have been a lot darker than we ever realized. Do you think Marcus Houston and Chris Stokes got away with something? Or is there another side to this story? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the dark side of the industry.